Hello, everyone. My name is Sriram Balasubramanian, and I am one of the architects and engineering team lead within the InterBase team here in Embarcadero Technologies. Thank you for taking time to join and understand and learn what's InterBase has been working on. And we are really, really proud and happy to bring you InterBase 2020 this year. And we hope that your development and deployment needs are better served by this release. Today, we are going to go over what InterBase has been thus far and what has been introduced new in this 2020 release. I've been with the InterBase team for a little over 25 years, and it's been an absolute pleasure to work in the team in various capacities. And I'm one of the architects of this at present, along with Charlie Caro and the rest of the team here. We are all excited to bring InterBase 2020 to our larger customer base, both from a deployment perspective, where we have certain performance enhancements, as well as from a development perspective, where we have better integrations with RAD Studio community. The agenda today is basically we're going to go over what the value of InterBase is for many of you out there who are looking to embed a database product for your application deployment. And we're also going to look at how developers can benefit from some of the InterBase specific features that are not available in other databases, or in certain cases, changes to certain features which other database vendors also have, but InterBase sort of serves a different purpose with those features enhancements. A quick historic perspective about what InterBase has been and where we are today. Before this release, of course, InterBase 2017 was the major release of InterBase, which has been in production for about 3 years now. And InterBase 2017 has been quite a popular release. We have expanded the number of platforms that we support with that, both in terms of the desktop and server platforms, as well as the other edition that we have, which is InterBase to go. Now, InterBase to go itself comes in two flavors. One is a product which has all the features, that is the InterBase to go edition, which has all the features and no limits on database size and such, which is available for a cost. And then there is a free version with a reduced feature set called as IB Lite. And the free version of IB Lite is included by default for all RAD Studio users. And if you're a RAD Studio developer using Delphi or C++ Builder, you have a built-in license of IB Lite that you can use with your applications without having to sign an agreement with us for deploying your InterBase application with IB Lite. So that really enhances and makes it easy for developers, and we have seen a good uptick in terms of developers adopting IB Lite for their embedded applications. Now, as you can see from a platform perspective, InterBase covers the major popular platforms out there. On the desktop and server side, of course, Windows and Linux are major platforms from a production perspective on the server side, whereas we do see developers also request the macOS platform support, where they can work with the developer edition on the Mac, but then they may have requirements to actually deploy on other platforms. On the InterBase to go and IB Lite editions, of course, these two editions are embeddable within your application. There is no separate server, and your application, whenever your application starts, the lifecycle of the database engine starts, and then when your application dies, your database engine also goes away. That is within your application itself. That's why we call it as embedded to go engine. Now, this is covered in a number of platforms out there, including those covered by desktop, that is Windows, Linux, and macOS. But we also bring InterBase to go and IB Lite to the mobile operating systems, Apple iOS and Google Android. And we have had this for our developers for the last 5 years plus, and we have seen some very good adoption in terms of developers who are using RAD Studio to build mobile applications, take on InterBase and IB Lite, InterBase to go and IB Lite with their applications for Android as well as iOS. Now, how do we know they're using this? In InterBase, of course, we do have statistics that we gather about deployments. When you deploy your product with our license, we do know how many installations have been done out there. And there's a one-time callback to Embarcadero that is done automatically. And we do gather some statistics in terms of how many times it has been deployed. So that is really, really beneficial for us to understand how our developers are using the product. And the majority of our developers, of course, are using the product on Windows because that's been available in one of the more popular offerings over the last 30 years, 25 years or so. And but we do have customers deploying InterBase in production scale for Linux with Linux server, as well as a lot of customers starting to increase their deployments on Android and iOS. So we are very eager to see the impact that InterBase is having with our customer base, and hope that it will just grow with our new releases. Some of the core values of InterBase for those who are new to the product, up until InterBase 2017, we have always presented InterBase as a near zero administration database with a very low total cost of ownership, but it provides a lot of features that other database vendors do and more. There are competitive features that we do present for InterBase. The primary objective of the product is to be an embeddable database for application deployments. So few things like near zero administration values, like a small memory and on-disk footprint for installing the product, silent installer that comes with the product, which you can use to install with the application, a self-tuning engine, which will accommodate how you go about doing garbage collections for obsolete records and such. And there's also the engine itself is a multi-version concurrency control, MVCC or MGA-based database engine. So we do look at how transaction lifecycles affect the various records and their versions, and how we keep them clean within the database as transactions go away and some of the records become obsolete, or some of the record versions at least become obsolete. Security encryption has been front and center over the last 10 years with InterBase, and we provide not only SQL-based role-based authentication, but also database encryption and column-level encryption within the database itself. So your data can be encrypted using industry standard encryption algorithms. We support both for encryption for data at rest and data on network for communication. So there's strong and weak encryption that's supported in the product. You can choose as a developer which one you would like for certain aspects or certain data entities within your database, or you can also go different levels of AES strength encryption that you want to use for sensitive data, keeping in mind that there is some very minimal performance impact to using stronger encryptions in the product. This, in our testing, we have noticed that the encryption need for performance is not impacted by more than 5% of the whole system, compared to one that is not encrypted at all. For data that is encrypted on disk, when we do bring it up and serve it for you in memory, we do unencrypt those and store it in memory. And but whatever is returned back to disk is all encrypted as per your definitions for the various tables. One thing that I would like to highlight with regard to InterBase encryption is InterBase not only supports full database file encryption, but it also supports column level encryption. So you can pick and choose which tables in your database, and even within tables, which columns should be encrypted with what encryption keys. You can have a wide variety of encryption management that is set up in your database with a lot of different strength keys, and we can use the SQL grant revoke mechanism to dole out who can use those keys and how it can be attached to specific columns. So we make it very, very flexible using our data definition language to not only do encryption management from simple commands, but also assign different keys to different entities within the database. At the decryption level, if a particular user comes in and they do not have decryption privileges, as a developer, you can assign default values that need to be shown to those kind of users who do not have access privileges on those. Of course, this is over and above the SQL security for that user that you have defined with regard to whether they can do select and inserts and DML-based commands on the table. You can go one level deeper and say whether they have decryption rights on the specific columns or not. The third value that we do provide in InterBase is mostly for our enterprise customers who are looking to use InterBase in an enterprise setup, but also for customers who are interested in disaster recovery, even if they are using smaller user base, because the data itself could be sensitive, whether they are working with hundreds of users or whether they are working with few users using the data. And any kind of system failure is always something that we should all be prepared for, at least from a setup perspective, so we can recover quickly and get our data back. So InterBase provides disaster recovery features in way of both short-term as well as long-term journaling capabilities and recovery functions as in point-in-time recovery. What we mean by short-term is when the system does crash and come back on the same system, on the local system, InterBase quickly recovers based on the journal that you have set up as a short-term journal and applies to your database instantaneously. So you don't really lose any time on the recovered data on the local system. But we do allow you to define long-term journaling functionality that goes beyond the system failure itself. So if you have transactions that are logged in long-term journal archives that are kept on a network file server, and these are constantly updated based on the frequency of your long-time archiving needs. And as in when this long-time archiving happens, if the primary system does go down, you can always recover all of your data that is journal archived onto a secondary system, and just by replaying what we call as a recovery log on your secondary system. Now, the good thing about the long-term archiving and journal archiving, as we call it, is that you can have a standby system that is constantly getting refreshed with the latest changes from the file server, where you have stored all your archives. So your recovery time is minimized or pretty much eliminated when a system failure does occur, on the primary system. Your standby system quickly can come back from the last time you recovered, and it just incrementally updates whatever changes have happened since the last time it recovered, and you can immediately make it online for your applications. So disaster recovery, we are seeing customers use it where it is sensitive, where they're having WAN applications, or whether they want to provide a sort of like some kind of a cover to power failures or node failures on certain systems. So they do set up InterBase disaster recovery with journal archiving effectively for that. Incremental data dumps are essentially a high-speed way of duplicating your database, or I would say mirroring your database for any kind of scale-out applications. So you can think of InterBase online dumps and incremental data dumps as a transactionally safe way of copying your database file over to another mirror. And of course, in this case, both the primary database and the mirror where you're copying to need to be accessible to the server that is being used to do the dump. The server needs to have access to this mirror where it's copying the pages to. Now, do remember that InterBase online and incremental data dumps, they're not a one-to-one relation, it's a one-to-many. So you can have multiple mirrors, and each one of these mirrors can be used as a read-only database for your applications. So if you can think of an application, just for example, say some application that you have out there is being used 10% for read-write transactions, and remaining 90% of the applications using the same database is for select-only queries, and they can afford to have a little bit of a lag in terms of what data they are serving. If that is the case, you can actually scale out your read-only applications to some of these mirrors, which are constantly kept up to date. There are customers out there with InterBase where they have a single primary database, but they have roughly around 12 mirrors out there, and each one of these mirrors are updated every 5 minutes. And these mirrors are, of course, lagging compared to the original primary database by 5 minutes width in terms of how frequently they have been updated. But this 5 minutes is just a sample. You can frequently update your mirrors, even as less than in seconds or in minutes. We do not, of course, recommend that you do it every second or two, because that does put additional load on the primary server, which has to do the work. But you can keep your dumps, as we call them, the mirror dumps, updated as frequently as your applications are able to serve that data. One caveat I would want to mention, or I should say a performance impact that has been available, performance enhancement has been available in recent releases of InterBase before 2017, is something called as a distinguished dump. So from your multiple mirrors that I mentioned, mirror dumps, you can identify one dump as a distinguished dump. Now, what is a distinguished dump? The primary database server understands that there is one mirror which is sort of like the most crucial mirror that needs to be updated. And the primary server keeps track of what pages have been updated on the primary mirror, or I should say on the distinguished dump. And these page listings are stored in the distinguished dump. So the next time it has to incrementally update it, it's a very quick update, because we track what pages have changed in the primary database, and only those pages are copied out to the destination distinguished dump without having to look up every page on the destination dump. Now, this is the benefit of having a distinguished dump, which is super fast compared to other mirror dumps, where if you are incrementally dumping, even those are not copied, all pages are not copied out to the target, but we have to go through, in those mirror dumps, we have to go through every page to know which pages need to be pushed out to the target. So having a distinguished dump is the most beneficial in terms of quickly bringing your dump back up to speed with the most relevant data from the primary database. In terms of integrations, of course, many of our InterBase releases have focused and brought forward developer productivity enhancements. Of course, InterBase is embedded or included as part of your Embarcadero development tools, Rat Studio, Delphi, and C++ Builder. And we also have connectivity to other development environments such as Visual Studio and Eclipse with regard to ODBC and JDBC connectivity. Some of the open database connectivity solutions that are out there, we provide database connectivity drivers out of the box in InterBase when you install the product. So for your Java applications and your Visual Studio applications, or Excel spreadsheets, or other ODBC applications that can benefit from InterBase, we have many customers using InterBase with those kind of applications and effectively. And being a database product, of course, SQL compliance is always paramount in terms of how we support SQL, the SQL language. InterBase has a strong set of SQL functionality that's ANSI SQL 92 compliant, as well as some features that are post ANSI SQL 92. And in terms of temporary tables and such, we do bring features as per the demand from our community, customer community. So we do not have all the latest, greatest ANSI SQL features in the product that's current with the latest version of ANSI SQL, but we do have a lot of features that are very popular with developers, and we think we serve at least 85 to 90% of the SQL functionality that are popularly used by developers. In terms of the performance itself, the single server a single server or a database can perform for any number of users out there, or any number of CPUs that you throw on the system. We can scale effectively all the way from a single user to unlimited number of users. We do have licenses that span across all of that. And of course, we have users who are using the product all the way from a single user to hundreds and thousands of users going back to the single instance of InterBase. So we do know that there are people who are putting it to good, effective use out there. And there may be certain middle tiers involved in terms of how we want to scale, but InterBase itself can address hundreds of users simultaneously accessing the database without any problems, provided the application is built well and the database has been tuned where necessary. Even though self-tuning is part of the database product, there are certain aspects of index selectivity as well as writing optimal queries that application developers need to pay heed to. But InterBase can work well to scale your product out there. Change views was a feature that we introduced back in InterBase XC7, and it's been available for the last 5.5 to 6 years. And we are very happy to note that we have just been our patent has been approved by the US Patent Office. And change views is unique to InterBase in that we provide a very powerful mechanism for you to track change data without making any modifications to your applications or to your database schema with regard to providing timestamps or things like that. We use the InterBase transactional model to, at the core in the engine, track what kind of changes have happened, and as a subscriber, what you want to track and how you want to deliver the changed information back to the subscriber is what we do inside the database engine by taking out all the complexity from an application perspective and putting it inside the database so you can effectively use it to provide applications that are that want to either deliver replication mechanisms or provide synchronization facilities in your application. You can use InterBase change views, and I highly recommend that you take a look at InterBase change views and put it to use. We are having a few customers who are putting it to use, and we have just been given very positive feedback on this feature set. Looking into a couple of specific things about RAT Studio and Aquadata Studio. RAT Studio 10.3 comes with both the Developer Edition and InterBase To Go Edition installed. At the same time, you can also deploy, as I mentioned, IB Lite applications for free, both on desktop and mobile operating systems with your RAT Studio applications. If you want to use InterBase To Go or InterBase Server in production, please do connect with our sales team, and we can help you put together a WAR agreement for your deployment needs. And we do have very competitive rates and very user-friendly costs for deploying InterBase with your applications. RAT Studio and Enterprise Architect also offers in 10.3 InterBase To Go for free mobile deployment. So we do offer a free mobile deployment for your applications that you are targeting specifically for mobile if you're using RAT Studio Enterprise and Architect. You may or may not know, but InterBase is also the backend database engine that supports RAT Server. RAT Server is a technology for doing REST-based application development from within RAT Studio, and you can deploy RAT servers today, but the background engine that is running for RAT Server is InterBase. So we are starting to see good adoption by developers starting to use RAT Server not only for their development testing, but also for the deployment needs for the REST-based applications. So we're eager to hear how you are putting RAT Server to use, and please do connect with the RAT Studio team if you have any specific questions about how it can be deployed to both Windows and Linux platforms. With every release of RAT Studio, of course, the platform support for your applications is really crucial, especially with the major vendors like Microsoft and Apple and Google really taking the platforms ahead by developing more and more features and improving the architecture and presenting 64-bit architecture as a necessity for application developers. Happy to mention here that InterBase has been delivering 64-bit application support across all our platforms, Windows, Linux, Mac, Android, and iOS. The recent release of RAT Studio 10.3.3 brought forward Android 64-bit development support, and InterBase is available in 10.3.3 for your Android up to 64-bit apps as well, along with all the other platforms that we support 64 and 32-bit. On the database tooling side, InterBase has a lot of command line tools that are available to you, but at the same time, we do provide a Windows-specific tool, IBConsole, out of the product, which has been available in our product for about 20 years now. We do continue to make incremental changes, and we'll go into some of those in the later slides. But we are very happy to present Aquafold's Aquadata Studio. Aquafold is a sister division within the larger IDERA umbrella of companies, of which Embarcadero Technologies is as well. So we are very happy to present Aquadata Studio's support for InterBase, starting with InterBase 2017. This particular database tool is a really popular database tool out there, and we are happy to see them start supporting InterBase. And as a database developer and administrator, you're going to be very happy with the Aquadata Studio support for InterBase and how you can use some of its unique feature sets and very developer and administrative productive functions within the tool. So please do take a look at Aquadata Studio and make it use it with InterBase 2017 and newer releases, and give us any feedback you can with regard to where we can make further improvements to help you as a developer. InterBase 2020 is here, right front and center now. It's been a couple of months since the release of InterBase 2020 for our Windows customer base, and we are continuing to work on bringing other server-side platforms in the coming weeks. But for now, InterBase developers and for production deployment, InterBase on Windows is available as a InterBase 2020 version. Some of the main highlights with this release, of course, we are bringing database tablespace support in InterBase for the first time. In many of these features, teams will go into some of the details in the upcoming slides, but we have tried to focus the feature set purely based on what customers have been asking us for quite some time, and we continue to deliver not only developer-centric features, but also features that are useful for customers at the production site. There may be instances where they may want to allocate different areas of the disk or different speed disks for certain data files, and database tablespaces helps them in that regard. You can portion your certain tables to go in certain table spaces so that you can allocate higher speed disks for those highly frequently used data for your applications. Performance monitoring, we introduced somewhere around 14 years ago, integrated performance monitoring within the database, which gives you great visibility into what tables, what procedures and triggers are being used inside a database, and also from a runtime perspective, showcase information about what are your IO statistics for each one of those entities. How many users are connected to your system? What are those users running at that instant? You can connect to any server, and you can also connect to any database within the server and view what the current activity is in that system. And if you identify any rogue application or query that is sort of monopolizing the server, you can take action as an administrator to shut down those attachments or transactions or kill certain queries that are not running optimally. So we give the power to you to not only monitor, but also take action with performance monitoring. In this release for InterBase 2020, we have added index usage metrics along with all the other entities that I mentioned. Now, from a developer, it's really important as a developer to track what the evolution of a certain database schema is. So you may want to document within the database certain aspects about that entity. So we bring alter table DDL to do consistent updates to many of the entities within the database using a single DDL command by identifying what those entities are. So it's a developer productivity enhancement that we are bringing in there. And we are really eager to see how you're going to put that to use, because it is just going to help you make your database schema more understandable for your users. Some SQL optimizations always go with every release and every major update that we do. So we are going to take a look at a couple of those right now. Security enhancements, we do use the OpenSSL version to provide over-the-wire network communication for our client-server communication. At the same time, we use some of their encryption algorithms to implement for our database encryption and column-level encryption support. So keeping our systems upgraded with the latest versions of OpenSSL is crucial from a security standpoint. So we bring the latest OpenSSL versions as well, builds as well for 102 in this release. IBConsole is our out-of-the-box GUI tool that's available on Windows. We'll take a look at some of the enhancements that IBConsole has done, along with also seeing how it is surfacing some of the InterBase 2020 related features. The new platform support, as I mentioned earlier on, Android 64-bit and Mac 64-bit are now available. Now, of course, with this release, InterBase To Go and IB Lite are also available already in the last couple of months, and they are included as part of RAD Studio 10.3.3. So if you're a RAD Studio developer, you have InterBase 2020 at your disposal, not only for your Windows server-based applications, but also for all of your InterBase To Go applications and IB Lite applications for both 32 and 64-bit. Let's take a look at some of the highlight features in the 2020 release. Today, if you're not using Tablespace in InterBase with your existing installs of InterBase, or if you're coming from a different, using a different database to InterBase, up until InterBase 2017, all you could do was define your whole database schema within a single database file. And so you would have entities like tables and index all just created. You can, of course, set up referential integrity, foreign keys, and primary key support. You can have both permanent or persistent tables as well as temporary tables defined in your database, but they all co-locate in the same database file. I would say database file as a larger entity rather than individual file sets, because InterBase does support multiple files within a database file. But from a schema definition perspective, you could not define up until InterBase 2017 where these tables and indices go. InterBase chose how it would put the data, and even if you have multiple files assigned to the database, InterBase would save data for any table and any index in different files within there, and you did not have any control over where they actually went. Now, because of this, of course, you could not implement or provide any optimization by providing a high-speed disk for certain sensitive data or a certain frequently requested information from within the database. You could not keep that on faster disks or keep some of the archival data on slower disks. You didn't have that flexibility up until InterBase 2017. So this is how your typical database would look with a single database file support without table spaces. Everything is co-located within this database file. With InterBase Tablespace, what we do now allow is for you to be able to define up to 254 table spaces. Now, each one of these table space can have, you can move your tables and indices to these table spaces, define it once, and InterBase will basically store all of the information for those tables or indices in those table spaces. Now, of course, each table space can be assigned to a disk of your choice on the same system. You may have, say, a couple of SSDs, solid-state drives on the system where you may want to have high-speed information, whereas you may want to keep some of your archival data in slower disks. So you can assign a table space to a file that resides on this fast or slow mediums, and thereby move your tables or indices to those table spaces. The primary table space is a known table space name within the database. Every database has a primary table space, and the primary database, by definition, has all of the schema definitions, whereas the table spaces do not have the schema definitions because the primary table space tracks all of the relations and how they are, how each and every table and indices are related to each other, but the actual data for the tables and indices can be stored on different table spaces. Now, this use of tablespace, of course, will require you to upgrade your ODS or on-disk version for InterBase, and that's currently at version number 18. So you would take the old schema, which we saw earlier on, where only the tables and indices were defined without any tablespace definition, and convert that. You can look at the result as such. When you have enabled table spaces, you simply go ahead and create a number of table spaces and where they reside on your system. And of course, each table space can have certain properties like reserving space or not reserving space. You may have archive information which does not change a lot, or lookup tables which do not change a lot, where you don't really need to reserve any space for changed versions. So in that case, you may want to define the table space as a no reserve space table space. So all the tables that are stored in there will get a no reserve space attribute. Every table, of course, can define a table space where they go to. And if you do not specify a table space for an index, it will automatically go to the table space where the table resides. So you will look at like primary key definitions will have index definitions that automatically go to the same table space where the table resides. But you can still pick and choose. You can have a table space that's just assigned for indices and define all the indexes to go to that table space if you choose to. But typically, you would keep this co-located, at least the tables and indices. That way, it's visible to you, and you can understand how you are utilizing that information within the table space. iSQL is a command line tool that we provide in the product, and the command line tool has certain quick commands like show, which will allow you to list various table spaces in your database and what each table space has in terms of what tables and indices it hosts. Now, tablespace backup restore is definitely one of those feature sets that goes along with the main tablespace storage mechanism that we have developed. You will also want to be looking at one of the performance sensitive reasons for providing enhanced backup restore functionality is that you may want to leave your archive information on the system because that is not really changing a lot, but you may still want to back up and restore your frequently changing data from other table spaces. So the backup restore functionality within InterBase through our command line as well as our service manager related functionality has been enhanced to allow a listing of table spaces for backup and restore. So you can pick and choose certain table spaces that are hosting tables with frequently changing information, and you can just back those up quite frequently. And they may only be hosting about 10% of your of all the data in your database, but they may be the most frequently changing information. So you may want to incrementally or more frequently take a backup of those table spaces, and you can now do that with just mentioning a list of table spaces in your backup command. Now, with these table spaces that are backed up individually, only those table spaces reside in the backup file, and you can restore those table spaces into an existing database with other table spaces that are being served already. So say you lost a particular table space file and you want to quickly recover information. You don't have to restore the whole database. You can just take a table space backup file and restore it over an existing database that is already under service. Now, you have a choice whether you want to restore from the table space backup file in its entirety, or if you want to just overwrite an existing table space file with backed up information from some time ago. Maybe one of your table space file has got corrupted and you just want to overwrite with whatever is there in the backup, and that way it will go ahead and replace the whole table space, in which case you will use the replace table space command. Whereas if you have a table space that is being serviced right now, but you lost information from one of its tables, right? You don't want to necessarily lose out on the newly created tables in the table space, in which case you will do a create table space action. And the create table space action will go ahead and truncate the tables without deleting the existing table space file. So your newly created tables in the table space will stay, and your older tables from your backup will also come to that particular table space. So we do allow a very flexible mechanism to not only back up your database with table spaces, but also selectively restore what table spaces you want restored, and even within a table space, whether you want to truncate or preserve the table space tables out there. As I mentioned earlier, we did enable index performance tracking or performance monitoring of various index use. Now, from a production performance sensitivity perspective, as a developer and also as an administrator, you're interested in finding out whether your database schema is being effectively optimized or used for your queries. And there are cases where you may want to know if certain queries are using certain indexes or not. And you can now get immediate feedback on what indices are being used in the database, and what the I/O sensitivity is for many of those indices. So you can pick and choose various. I mean, we have listed out here a number of use cases how you can benefit from the new performance monitoring aspects of index metrics. We look forward to additional use cases from our customer community, but there are more documented in our documentation site. So I highly recommend that you go ahead and take a look at some of these use cases. One specific case I will just highlight out here is a couple of use cases. One would be if you want to understand for a particular table what indexes are being used and how often, you can just go ahead and execute the first query that I mentioned out here. Whereas the fourth query about listing all indices that are index type foreign key will also give you some insight into how effectively your foreign keys are being used, or sometimes in some cases the foreign keys come in the way in terms of being used according to the optimizer, but you may not want to have those foreign keys in there for your queries. So you may want to override the plan with your own SQL optimized plan to discard the foreign key from your queries. There are also cases where you may want to know if there are duplicate definitions of indexes, because it does have an impact on storage and your DML queries when you have duplicate indexes. Of course, other than the fact that it is not really useful to have a duplicate index, there are many a times cases where a customer has a primary key defined on the table, but they also define a unique key additionally. It serves no real purpose from an indexing perspective having both of those. Just a primary key would suffice. Also, in some cases, some of the tables have foreign keys defined, and InterBase creates a foreign key index. But also, customers go ahead and create a user index to track those same set of columns that are part of the foreign key in that order. So you can go ahead and identify what indices are defined with regard to those, and eliminate those duplicate user-defined indices from your system, so it occupies less space and effectively uses your default indices that InterBase provides. The data dictionary feature that I alluded to earlier is about providing better documentation of your database entities, and you can use the alter description for various database entities that are listed out here to give any information about your entity. Now, of course, database extraction, metadata extraction tools in InterBase, both in terms of iSQL as well as in IBConsole, have been updated to give these as part of your metadata output. But also within the tools, you can go ahead and selectively take an entity and put in your description. And it makes it easy for database tools developers to use a single command to work with multiple entities within the database. We expect that more and more database tools that support InterBase today enable this feature so that is useful for the end user, how they document the various entities within the database. Some of the SQL optimizations that I alluded to are for better usage of indexes in cases where it is not intuitive immediately by looking at the query. So we have optimized some of the inequality operators and the NOT operators to take their opposite representation and use the index where possible. So many of the use cases are listed out here, but you will, if you do notice if you notice improved performance for many of your queries in older releases of InterBase compared to the new one, in the new one, if it is improved, please do understand that it might be due to one of these improvements. But at the same time, if you do identify any queries that are now running slower compared to your previous releases, please do bring it to our attention so we can analyze and find out what the case might be. But we are hoping for more success with these optimizations in InterBase 2020. And it's something that is out of the box. This optimization, of course, is not dependent on the ODS version. Our optimizer works with the information, with the index definitions by converting the queries for any ODS. IBConsole is our GUI tool, and graphical user tool for that's available out of the box in InterBase. And in this particular release, we have enhanced IBConsole to eliminate many of the stability issues that have been reported by our customers over the years, but also provide support for many of the newer features. So InterBase 2020 features like Tablespaces and data dictionary are supported in IBConsole through database wizards within the tool. So you can easily modify your schema to use this feature set. Change view subscription is something that we are highlighting in IBConsole in this release. So you can attach to a database with change view setup, and you can work as a consumer or a subscriber with the data. And the data that is provided to you in your result set is now color coded. So you can actually identify what's changed, both in terms of new records that have come into the table for your subscription snapshot, but also what data has been deleted or what has been changed within a particular column. So it's very useful for customers who are running ad hoc queries or who want to perhaps run queries to take a look at what's changed in the database since I last looked at it a week, a month ago. And it gives you a very visually intuitive way of the change in information that you can quickly identify. Growing with the needs of IBConsole, there are customers out there who are putting the 32, who put InterBase IBConsole 32-bit architecture limits for encountering those limits. So we went ahead and also developed IBConsole as a 64-bit application. Now, for many of you who do not know, IBConsole is a Delphi application using our IBX connectivity to connect to InterBase. So we are using our own technologies to build the tools, and IBConsole is a native 64-bit application for your 64-bit edition, whereas we provide a 32-bit IBConsole on your 32-bit edition, because you may have dependencies on Windows 32-bit systems that you may want to use InterBase 32-bit edition for. So in those cases, you will continue to use IBConsole in its 32-bit form, but for every Windows 64-bit platform where you're using InterBase 64-bit edition, you now get an IBConsole 64-bit executable. So you can retrieve larger data sets, and your IBConsole process can utilize more than 4 GB of virtual memory. So it is useful for a few of our customers, and we only anticipate that more and more customers are going to benefit from that. For queries that you're running on the system, we now provide syntax highlighting for certain keywords. So visually, it is more easy for you to identify what's the InterBase keyword versus what non-keyword usage you're using with your SQL. Makes it easy for you to just browse through your queries while you are executing them in the WSQL window. Within your SQL query window, now we do have additional transaction metrics that you can not only see and commit and roll back. Some of these features we wanted to incorporate as part of a change view mechanism. So if you're transitioning from a normal snapshot mode to a subscription snapshot, how we go ahead and commit and allow you to move forward with your subscription snapshot, we do make it even more easy for you to use from within WSQL within IBConsole. And some of the show commands have been added in WSQL IBConsole dialog as well. So you can see what the current mode is for a transaction that you're using, and what is IBConsole WSQL using as so that as a user, you know what data you're seeing is consistent with your transaction mode. Takeaways, of course, I would like for you all to understand the features that InterBase provides and what value it brings to your application, both from a development as well as your ease of deployment consideration. I highly encourage you to use InterBase with your applications that you may want to deploy to any number of your desktop, server, or mobile platforms. And the applications can only scale really well with InterBase, and pretty much all of the features are available across all of the editions in InterBase. Only IB Lite is limited in some regards because it's a free offering, but many of the other features, all the other features are available across server and to go. And in a couple of cases, it may not, like for example, performance monitoring is not something that's conducive to a single embedded application, but it's available on server editions, but not on IB Lite or to go. Now, when you do deploy your applications, please do pay heed to the silent installers that we have. You do not have to run the InterBase installers in GUI mode and have your end users go through the process of installing and clicking through the various wizards, you can provide install specific custom attributes, and InterBase will silently install the product for you without the end user actually even knowing that InterBase is installed with your application. So we make it easy for you to deploy InterBase, and the install ranges anywhere from 20 to 30 seconds if you're doing it silently, if at that, depending on the system speed. But if you're using InterBase to go, there is no installer involved. The InterBase to go or IB Lite application comes with the InterBase database engine DLL or shared that is bundled along with the application. So there is no installer there at all. Just remember that in either of these cases, both for server as well as to go, you will want to include the deployment license file along with it. Once you have set up a WAR agreement with Embarcadero, you will be provided a license that you can use to deploy with your application. So please do include that as part of your application before you deploy your application. So as soon as it's installed, it can work out of the box for your customers. Please put database encryption, keep that in the forefront of your decisions when you're ready to deploy the product. Some of the developers are interested in looking at what they want to encrypt while they're developing the product itself, so which is a good idea because it gives you some understanding about what kind of sensitive information you can store in the database and what strength of the encryption keys you may want to mandate for those sensitive data. So keep database encryption in the forefront of your development needs, but definitely pay heed to it when you're deploying the application and see how you can customize or control the different encryption needs from a database perspective as well as from a column level encryption perspective. Now, of course, when you're deploying client-server applications, you will also want to take a look at InterBase over-the-wire client-server encryption, OpenSSL connectivity provided encryption needs as well. So you can deploy your public and private key to both your server and or rather your client and server-side installations, so they can work through SSL connections. So those connections are not open to any unexpected actors out there who are looking at network data. InterBase change views, as I mentioned earlier, is a very, very powerful synchronization and replication enabler. We do see a few customers over the years before InterBase change views was available. Developers have actually put together their own custom synchronization features within their application, and over time it is not easy to keep that maintained. So we take away all of that complexity from you as an application developer by providing InterBase change views by just quickly taking any existing database and slapping a change view subscription on top of it. So please do take a look at InterBase change views in detail and see how you can benefit from many of those features and how you can track changes not only for a single application, but within that application for every single user, and within that user for any single device that they're using. So you can track it to that granularity, and depending on the device or the user, you can always go back to the server and use change views for optimal retrieval of your data. Now, optimal retrieval meaning that your database bandwidth requirements for network communication is drastically cut down if you're doing a subscription snapshot of your data. Otherwise, you're pulling down more information than necessary and trying to resolve what's changed and what's not changed. With InterBase change views, you don't have to do any of this. And along with that, I will also mention that FireDAC, which is the database connectivity in RAD Studio, supports InterBase change views at a higher level, where it allows you easy merging of that information with your local cache of data when you're retrieving information from a remote server. So please do take a look at some of those. There are a couple of blog articles on the Embarcadero blog site about change views and what are the different aspects of change views that you can definitely leverage in your RAD Studio application. So please do take a look at that. Now, of course, InterBase performance monitoring allows you to use something like IBConsole and monitor a bunch of different databases out there. But at the same time, even within that, for a single server instance, if a single server instance is serving a number of databases, you can now monitor that server instance directly without having to individually monitor each one of those databases. So what this allows you to do is take a look at a single system and say, these are all the databases that InterBase is serving on that system. Let me see what databases are putting what level of stress on the system by just monitoring that single instance of InterBase. So it's very powerful. You'll be able to identify cross connections and see which database is utilizing more of the resources in a single system than the other by looking at the server-side performance monitoring. If you're a new user of InterBase, you can definitely start with the free IB Lite if you're a RAD Studio user, and go up in your usage and benefit from even better functionality with to-go and server deployments. Now, last but not the least, if you're using the latest versions of RAD Studio, you already benefit from additional licenses that you are given for free to use InterBase. And we definitely hope that you have better success developing database applications for InterBase and deploying it with InterBase. Hello, everyone. Welcome, and this is going to just be a short, quick demo of InterBase 2020 features. This is Sriram Balasubramanian here, and we're just going to take a look at a couple of the features that I presented in the slides earlier. We spoke about tablespaces as a main theme or a feature within InterBase 2020. In the interest of time, I'm just going to show you a tablespace database that has been enabled with tablespaces and how you would navigate within IBConsole just to make sure that you can alter tablespace definitions and back up specific tablespaces and such. So as you can see here, I'm using IBConsole or GUI tool on Windows, and it's been enabled with tablespace support. So there are a bunch of databases that I've defined out here, and just for the demonstration purpose here today. The first database that we're going to take a look at is a database showcasing tablespaces. Now, tablespaces, of course, is a feature that requires ODS version 18. So you will need InterBase 2020 to use this feature, and your databases need to be ODS version 18. The first thing you'll notice in a database that's been set up with tablespaces is a tablespace node, and you will see a listing of all the tablespaces that are available within that database. So as you can see, even though the database itself is, there is a high level of file for the database, but within that database, there are multiple files that host each one of these tablespaces. So once, if you just take a look at one of the tablespaces, we can look at the properties, and you'll notice that where it resides and what the page size is for the tablespace and what tables and indices reside in the tablespace. Currently, of course, all the page sizes for various tablespaces within a single database is the same as the database page size that you define originally. But in the future, we may look at allowing the flexibility of different page sizes, because you may have applications that may want to use larger page sizes for certain tables, and that way you can assign those to other table spaces that way. But that's the future development thing that we are looking at. But for now, all the table spaces have to share the same page size. The one aspect for a table space that is available today is the reserve space attribute. And the reserve space attributes in InterBase, by default, every data page is allocated with 20% free space, or we reserve about 20% free space for future modifications of data, for future versions to be co-located within the same data page as the original record. So we start with 20% reserving of the space. But if if you have certain archive tables that belong in a table space, and those archive tables are not really changing, they're basically lookup data, you may want to define a table space as no reserve space and go ahead and put those archive tables in that table space. That way, 100% of the data page is used for existing records, and there is no reserving of space for every version. The tablespace metadata is very simple. You just create a tablespace with a name and the file where it resides. And the only attribute that you would add on to this is the reserve or no reserve space. So these are a bunch of table spaces that are defined in this database. So if you take a look at the view metadata service within IBConsole, you'll be provided the whole database metadata, and in that you'll get all of the table space definitions. You'll also see within that extract metadata for each table, for example, has been assigned a table space. This is an optional definition, of course. If you do not assign a table space, the tables go into the primary table space. And the primary table space is a reserved table space, which is the original table space within the database. But you can assign the table or index to additional table spaces that you have defined. You can define up to 254 secondary table spaces, of course. When you do define an index, the index by default goes to the same table space where the table is defined. But if you do want to store a bunch of indexes in their own table space, you can provide the attribute and make those indexes reside in a different secondary table space as well. Of course, as and when you add records to those tables, they go to their own table space. So there are benefits of utilizing faster disks with certain table spaces and slower disks with others. One of the benefits of table space is that you want to selectively back up and restore your table spaces and leave some of the lookup or archive data as is. You don't want that to be part of your backup and restore mechanisms. This will allow you to reduce the maintenance time that you spend on restoring from a backup and then making the database available to your users. So let's take a quick look at how you would do that today with IBConsole. When you select a particular database, you can go ahead and right-click on the database node and back up that particular database. And here I can select, I am provided a list of table spaces within the database, and I can create my backup file with certain table spaces in it only. So in this case, I'm choosing only to back up my primary table space. So I'm going to move all the other table spaces off to the side to be excluded. And when I do that, only primary is being backed up. So as I do this, this is a single select at this point. In the future, we'll look at a multi-select option. But when I back up my table space, IBConsole is going to be, I'm going to name the backup file so that I can identify what those what table spaces are included in that. This is just a ease of use setup. IBConsole is going to be utilizing the right options to back up and restore the table spaces. For backup, of course, there is no change in the option. InterBases recognizes that you are going to be providing table space name, as I alluded to in the slide earlier. You have to provide the option to provide the list of table spaces that you want to back up. Thereby, InterBase understands that it's a table space backup and not a whole database backup. So when I back up this table space alone, I am provided the backup is complete. Let's just go ahead and create another backup with a couple of other table spaces. So for now, maybe what we can do is we can just take two table spaces, the primary and another secondary table space, and exclude the rest of them. Now we can name this backup, of course, as something else. Let's say primary and T space 1, because we are backing up two table spaces here. And once that backup is complete, let's go ahead and assume that we are continuing to work with the tables. So for the tables that are allowed out here, we'll just take a look at the T0. As you will see in the tables listing, each table, we also showcase what table space it resides in at this point. And likewise, for all the indexes that we have defined, which table spaces they reside in. So let's make a quick modification to one of the table data and make sure that we can add additional records just so that we can showcase what a backup restore will change. So now once we have made some modification to T0, I'm going to make another modification to T1 and just do the same. Commit and refresh, and we'll make just one more to T2 with the same information. Now that we have committed and changed all of the information, let's just make sure that it's all there. So the data in the current database is with our modifications. And say we want to restore the primary table space, which is where T0 resides, from the backup. We have certain data that we want to restore from the backup, and T0 happens to be the table that we want to completely restore. So now what we will do is we'll go ahead and disconnect from the main database and utilize the backup that we have just made. So we'll restore from the backup and select, this is the backup that we just created, tspace primary IBK. I should select the backup file and not, there we go. Now we are restoring from the primary backup. Now what it does, as soon as you identify a backup file, IBConsole through the InterBase services is able to provide you a listing of all the table spaces that exist in that backup file. So we can select and deselect what table spaces. So if there's a backup file with multiple table spaces, you can selectively restore individual table spaces from the backup file so that you don't overwrite everything onto the system. So I'm going to take a look at just restoring the primary table space out here, and we want to restore it onto the table space, the database TBSP. Now, of course, when you're restoring, you do not need to identify where those table spaces go, because that information is already there in the backup file. You just want to go ahead and define the main database that you want to restore that information to. The one aspect that you would see out here is when you're restoring the primary table space, you cannot change the location. But when you are restoring from other table spaces, you can define what locations they should go to. The other aspect I would say that you would be paying attention to is whether you want to create a table space or restore the table space. As I mentioned in the slide deck, when you're restoring, you can choose to either truncate the tables in a table space by using create table space, or you can completely replace the table space into a target, thereby eliminating the whole file and then restoring completely from the backup. So in this case, in primary, we are going to, primary is a special case because there is no replacing, because that's where all the database metadata is. So we're just going to create a table space which is going to truncate the database itself. Create and replace are the same, whether it's in primary itself. Okay. So now we are going to go ahead and restore, and the restore is now completed. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the table space itself and go to the tables that have been restored. So we have restored primary table space. T0 is the only table in the primary table space. So if you take a look at the data in T0, you do remember that we added a record with identifier 55 and T0 05 Feb, and that is not existing anymore because the restore process truncated the information in the primary table space and restored all the data from the backup. If you look at other table spaces where we had done modifications, things like T1 and T2, you will notice that they have not been affected at all. The restore process did not touch table space 1, T space 1, or T space 2, thereby leaving your other modifications to other table spaces without impacting them. So you can selectively restore different table spaces as you choose. We're going to stop the table spaces part of it right here, but I just wanted to show you the other way of restoring from a table space from a backup file that has multiple table spaces. So you may remember that we backed up primary and T space 1 at one shot, and we are going to try and restore that to the main database. And this time we have provided the number of table spaces that are backed up in the backup file. So you can selectively choose which ones you want to restore in your restore process. And IBConsole will basically use the tablespace options to restore those tablespaces. Let's go ahead and replace the tablespace for both of them. And now when we go and take a look at the database, T0, which resides in the primary database, the primary tablespace, of course, does not have the row number 5 because it's been restored. And T1 should also have been restored with the original data. And the new record that we added today is not present anymore because we did replace it. So that concludes the tablespace demo. We'll take a look at the next demo for change views. IBConsole, as I mentioned, has additional support for change views in this particular release of InterBase 2020. We're going to take a look at a quick database that we already have defined for this. Let's take a look at an encrypted database with subscriptions defined in it. Now I'm logging in here as SysDSO, the data security officer account, which has a responsibility to create and maintain the encryption keys. Now, when you connect as SysDSO, you're provided the encryptions tab in IBConsole, and you can look at all the encryption keys with various strengths that you've defined. The HR key in this particular sample is in the employee database, where HR employee can actually look at certain sensitive information about employees with regard to salary and other things. But other users of the database cannot. So as you can see, the HR key has been defined as a strong encryption key with a 128-bit bit vector. And there's another, and it's only been granted encryption rights to the owner of the database, which happens to be sysdba. The other backup key is typically for backing up your database, and you want to provide that with the highest encryption within the database so that you can back up all of the information. Your backup files are also encrypted. We'll switch from a sysDSO user to a different user, sysdba, who is the owner of the database. And you'll notice that the DBA has, now we'll take a look at what the DBA can do with regard to subscriptions. In the same database, we also have defined change view subscriptions, and this is a subscription that we have defined as CV employee sales. This subscription tracks, if you just double click that, it tracks a bunch of different changes in the database. One is the employee table, and the other one is the employee project table for new additions. If you do not define any actions for a table, all changes in the table are tracked, except for delete. You do track, insert, update, or any particular change. An employee project, we are selectively choosing to only track insert of new records within the table. Now, this subscription, of course, can be assigned to different people. In this case, we have allowed this HR employee to be a subscriber of that particular key, so they can subscribe to changes in those tables. I'm going to switch roles out here and connect now as a HR employee. Now, HR employee themselves can not look at what subscriptions are available. They have been already provided the subscriptions that they can take a look at. Just going to quickly make sure that I have the right connection. And now the HR employee is going to be doing certain queries. Now, when you're working with IBConsole, and this is a WI-SQL window where you can run your SQL commands, I'm going to go over a couple of quick changes that are available across all feature sets, but that is specific to IBConsole. As I mentioned, there's a show transaction command now, which can show you what your transaction settings are. In my case, I have set those to concurrency mode and no wait, and that is what you're seeing out here. That's the default. If you wanted to change your IBConsole WSQL transaction options, you would change it here and then set that as a default so that future sessions of WSQL will use those as a default. And I do want to mention that if you're working with subscriptions, you do have to be in a snapshot mode so that your transactions can roll forward once you have retrieved the data when you do a commit. So here we are going to look at running a query before running it in a subscription mode. So for example, I'm just running a normal query out here to get all of the data from employee project ordered by employee number. So now in this particular case, you're not running under subscription. You're looking at all of the information. One thing that's new in this release of IBConsole is that the grid is a lot more powerful. So you can do specific filtering of your result set within the grid. So if you wanted to just look at certain employees' information, you can do that. So we have enhanced the data grid capabilities within IBConsole. Having said that, now this is a full set of the result set when you would run this query. But now you may want to, as a HR employee, look at a subscription, CV employee sales active. So as an IBConsole consumer, I'm connecting to InterBase and saying, I want to use this subscription, and this is my tool. You may notice that I'm using an uppercase subscription keyword. In this release of InterBase 2020, there is one particular bug which will mandate you to put an uppercase subscription keyword out here. In a future update, we will fix it so that you can put either any mixed case or lowercase as a keyword. So when you enable your subscription to be active, so it does say that require transaction isolation mode to be snapshot. Current active transaction is not. So as soon as you just notice that IBConsole switched you from your original transaction to a transaction that is consistent with the subscription requirements. When you are in active subscription mode, the status indicator does change it to show you what subscription you are using. We'll then go ahead and run the same query that we ran earlier. And you will not see any data because you've already looked at all of the information earlier on. In my testing, of course, earlier on, I had looked at all the information within a subscription. The first time you see it, you will get all of the information. But when you execute the same query a second time, you will not see any changes that you have seen before. The other query that we are going to be doing out here is select star from employee. Now, in this case, of course, I'm seeing the subscription snapshot. So what you're seeing out here is there has been a change to the employee table in terms of the salary. So now the color-coded part of the result set is going to show you that there is a change in this particular record, and the information that you're seeing within the subscription chart, this is a column that has modified the information for the salary. When you do go ahead and commit your query, you have moved forward your subscription snapshot so that any more execution of that query is not going to give you any changes because there are no changes yet. So if you run the same query again by connecting to that subscription, we are going to connect to the subscription once again and run those same queries. We should not be seeing any more records. If you may remember that when we did select star from employee last, we saw some changes, but now that we have moved the subscription forward by committing the transaction, we are not going to see any more changes. So now let's take a look at, let's just go ahead and commit this and do an external trigger of a change within the database. So we connect to the same database from another application. This happens to be our iSQL application. And we're going to change the employee's salary for employee number 4. We are going to change the salary and give them a 5% raise. Okay, so maybe we cannot increase the salary a lot for that employee. We are disconnected from our IBConsole session, and we go ahead and try to modify another employee, perhaps. Maybe we are running into a check constraint violation for that particular employee's salary. It cannot be increased that often. So now we have modified the salary by giving a 1% raise to that particular employee and committed that change. We can connect back to, when we come back later and connect to the system, we want to be notified of what changes have happened in that particular employee's record. So we initially we do run the normal query outside of it. We can, just to make sure that we are looking at the information right. So if you look at the employees list and order by emp number, we're going to get a list of all the employees within the database. If we go ahead and now look within the subscription window, and make it active, we are now within a subscription window. Let's go ahead and execute the same query once again and see what changes have happened in the database. Here you will see that there has been a change to employee number 4, and the salary column has been updated once again. This is the 1% increment that we gave to that employee. So you can see how powerful change views can be in terms of only retrieving the changes for certain records that you are subscribed to, or certain tables that you're subscribed to in terms of changes. So hopeful that the change views demo was useful for you in communicating what it can, how powerful it can be, and how you can use it within your databases. In this particular case, of course, I'm going to take a look at one additional aspect of the demo, and that is with server-side monitoring. Let's go ahead and connect to different databases and execute. In InterBase releases prior to this, you had to, if you wanted to do server-side performance monitoring so that all databases are combined in your view, you had to individually connect to the admin.ib user database and then monitor the performance of the system from there. But in InterBase 2020, you do not have to do that anymore. You can just connect to any number of databases. All of these databases are serviced by InterBase right now, and you're executing certain queries on the system. So you're executing certain queries on the system, and they have utilized certain indices to service those calls. Now, when you do look at the database server instance, you can right-click on the server instance and invoke server-wide performance monitoring. And you are presented with a deck of tabs that showcase what databases are loaded on the system. As you notice, we have connected to employee ODS 18 and the Tablespace databases. So you can selectively look at all the databases from a single view, and admin.ib is always loaded in the system. You are not connected to it, but InterBase uses that for user authentication. Now, within the database tab, of course, all of these tabs allow you to filter the result set to a database of your choice. So it will reduce the number of records that you take a look at. The new thing in InterBase 2020 is the add of, we have added the indices tab, so you can look at what indices are being used within the system. Database ID 2 happens to be ODS 18, which is where we ran some of those queries. So we are going to take a look at for RDB foreign 6 as the index, which is being used to run, and what kind of statistics it is showcasing. Node walks, or basically index node walks, how many nodes have been traversed to service your query. So we are just going to re-execute these queries and show that the node walks number is going up, or which index has been used. The highlighted row up above is a foreign key index, which is what is used in the plan out here. So we're just showcasing the detail of data that is going to be shown to you from a monitoring perspective. So it was earlier on 114. The next refresh cycle of that index is going to show you additional data right there. It went from 114 to 228. That showcases that even though the plan was used, the index was used to sort of retrieve the information to service some of these queries. So that concludes the demo portion of InterBase 2020 features. There are a lot more that you can play with regard to tablespaces and server-side performance monitoring and other optimizations that are available in InterBase 2020 release, and also look at how change views can be beneficial to your application development aspect. Thank you. We'll now move on to Q&A. I've answered a couple of questions. Are there any converters going from Oracle to InterBase with heavy traffic with record updates? I would suggest that you should be taking a look at using InterBase change views by setting up an InterBase server as a middle tier. You can move your data from Oracle to InterBase as frequently as you want with some third-party mirroring solution or replication solution, or rolling out your own Oracle to InterBase data transfer mechanism. Once you have done that, the InterBase database that is serving the server that's serving the InterBase database can now be set up with change views, and you can write clients on mobile or desktop platforms to use InterBase change views to retrieve information as a subscriber, as a change view subscriber. So when you use this facility, the network bandwidth requirements for your change view data is going to be drastically reduced, and that's going to help you from a heavy traffic record update perspective. The next question from Alf Christopherson is, there seems to be several SQL translation tools for moving InterBase to Oracle. What I would like if there exists some doing the opposite. In many academic institutions where funding often is very small, moving from Oracle to InterBase would save a lot of funding and make sure research work possible with less investments and save taxes. Yes, there are third-party tools, even though I do not have first-hand experience using any of those tools to move data from Oracle to InterBase from a continuous integration mechanism. There are tools, of course, that will allow you to extract information and import into InterBase. There are many tools for that, but there are also replication tools that I sent you the name of one of those in as an answer to your earlier question. So please do take a look at that and see if you can implement one of those or prototype with one of those tools and allow your Oracle data to continuously stream into your InterBase database, and then you can use InterBase change views on the InterBase database itself. Ken Wilkinson, thanks, excellent presentation. Thank you, Ken. Thank you all for joining in. If there are any further questions, please do post them, and we would love to connect with our customers and help you through adopting InterBase and making it a success for your business. Thank you.